Welcome to Radio Gaianim, bringing you a Sophianic broadcast featuring visionary teacher John Lamb Lash.
Today is the 4th of August 2018, and I'm here, Ginny, with John Lamb Lash, and this talk is called
Revealing the Historical Error of Flat Earth.
So, John, you're going to reveal the lie, the historical lie of Flat Earth.
The historical lie. I'm not claiming that all of Flat Earth is a lie. It's a mess to sort out, but this is the place we've decided to start and might possibly do 3 talks on this.
Yeah, because it's such a big subject, and I'm going to say now we're actually going to disable comments for these 3 talks because flat earthers are going to come and they're going to be really upset, and there's no point arguing with a flat earther.
Right, and any flat earthers who want to discuss it can mirror it on their channel and they can open their comments, but we're closing comments on this.
So I'd just like to put this into perspective. John, you started writing a book called The Sorcerer's...
The Flat Earth Riddle, A Sorcerer's Explanation.
Yeah. And that was a couple of years ago when Flat Earth was really being manipulated by algorithms on Google. You couldn't go anywhere on the internet without having Flat Earth theory shoved down your throat.
It was the beginning of 2016, and at the end of 2015, you had founded a forum-type journal. So we had a number of people on hand, and I called upon that team, and I want to recommend them and thank them for the brilliant research work that they did for me in the early months of 2016 as I was planning this book.
Yeah, so there were 10 of us, and you know who you are. I'm not going to name you, obviously, but I was just going through the material last night of everything that you wrote, and you were all completely stellar. We all spent 3 months looking at Flat Earth. You, John, asked us, I think it was about 11 questions. So
that's right.
We all went off in our different genres of the Flat Earth and researched. And I'll say the one thing that we all reported back was that we all felt ill from looking at it for 3 months.
Yeah, and we got a bit ill today reviewing the material.
Again, yeah, because the problem with Flat Earth is the Flat Earthers are claiming that it's a Jesuit Masonic psyop on humanity, that we've been lied to, that the Earth is spherical, and
there's a huge cover-up of the true cosmology, which is a Flat Earth cosmology. And when you start to delve into it, it's so murky and so twisted that I would think it's the measure of a sane person, a sane, reasoning person, that you would feel somewhat ill going into the genre.
Yeah, so let's just cover what the 3 talks are going to be about. So this first one is going to be about revealing the historical lie of Flat Earth. And
the backstory of how the current paradigm of Flat Earth came to be constructed.
Yeah, the second talk is going to be about...
deconstructing the psyop itself.
Yeah, and the third talk is going to be from a shaman's point of view.
Right. I had intended to write this book, and today we just delved into our files. I think I have probably the basis now with the research, team research in my writing of a 200-page book on Flat Earth. I was going to call it The Flat Earth Riddle, A Sorcerer's Explanation. So in part 3, we'll go into what is a sorcerer's explanation of Flat Earth, and that carries the subject into an entirely different dimension.
Well, 200 pages, that's a coincidence because Eric DeBay, who's the major proponent of Flat Earth, has 200 reasons why the Earth is flat on his website. So
yes.
We'll talk more about him in talk 2, I think.
In part 2.
So let's go back to the beginning of the historical Flat Earth.
Right. What everyone would benefit to know, I believe, what every person who's looking at this controversy needs to know is that there is a lie about the a lie about the flat earth theory that doesn't concern the theory itself, but it concerns the claim of who held that theory.
Yes.
And this has been called by one writer whom I'm going to cite, it's been called the flat error.
Yeah.
What is the flat error? Well, it's an error about the historical background of flat earth. Now, you can call it an error. I'm calling it a lie here, obviously. I don't know if it's which. It's a mixture of the two. But it's constantly and emphatically repeated by the flat earthers. So either they don't know that it's untrue and they're repeating it out of ignorance, or they know that it's untrue and they're deliberately lying. I don't know which is the case.
But that's the problem. That's the major problem with this entire subject, isn't it? It's a lie within a lie within a lie. It's just it's a pile of chopped up spaghetti, and if you're trying to put it back into a main dish, it's
impossible to do.
Almost impossible.
Almost impossible. We're giving our best shot here. So what in essence is the flat error or the historical lie? Well, it is the claim made by, as far as I know, 100% of the flat earthers make this claim, that our acceptance today of the statement that the earth is round is recent. Whereas if you go back into the past, back before Copernicus, into the Middle Ages, into classical history, and into ancient civilizations in China, Babylonia, Egypt, and India, all of those civilizations, all of those cultures maintained that the earth was flat.
Which is a lie.
Which is completely untrue. So typically if you log on or click on to a flat earth clip on YouTube, one of the things that you will often see coming at you straight down the pike, shoving it straight down your throat and in your face, is a montage of ancient maps. A Chinese model of the universe, the Babylonian model, the Egyptian model, the Aztec Maya model, the model of the Nordic mythology, the Yggdrasil, the tree of the, and they will produce this montage, a flood of images. And the voiceover says that all of these images show that the people in the ancient past, whom we regard and respect for their high achievements, held that the earth was flat. That is completely untrue. And unfortunately, they load their argument with that particular error or lie. So I'm going to take maybe 5 or 10 minutes to try to show the counter-argument to that. First of all, in the ancient cosmologies of China and Egypt and Babylonia, you can find and pick out fragments of things that were said that would appear to support flat earth. For instance, there is a statement in the pyramid text of ancient Egypt, just one line in the pyramid text, which are massive, which refers to the islands floating in the sky. The planets, presumably including the earth, as islands floating in the sky. So they take this as evidence that an island is flat, right? An island isn't flat, but it appears to be flat, floating in the waters of the sky. What you will find is that when you go back and look for evidence for belief in the flat earth in classical and ancient times, let's say before 400 AD, you find two sorts of seemingly supportive evidence. One is very ambiguous references that could be read to mean the earth is flat, but do not actually necessarily mean that. And the second is that you will find, for instance, in the classical period of Greek science, you will find a number of the notable Greek philosophers and scientists who held the view that the earth was flat. You will equally find in Greek science and in Egyptian science another number that held that it was spherical. So how do you make up your mind? Well, I propose you would do this. You would take a sheet of paper, you would draw a line in the middle. On the left hand, you would name the classical authors, like Lactantius, presumably Thales and others, over a 1,000-year period, at the meridian of Greek science, who held the flat earth view. You would list them. You might come up with a list of 8 or 10. Then, on the right-hand column, you would list all the contemporaries of that period who held that the earth was spherical, and you will come up with 20 or 30. Okay? Then, that's not enough, because I'm not saying that the argument should be decided democratically. Then you want to look at what were the achievements and the arguments of the flat earthers. What did they give as arguments? What was their body of knowledge? And compare that to the body of knowledge of those who held that the earth was spherical, and there's no contest. By and large, the claims on the left-hand column are simply claims, whereas the claims that the earth was spherical in the right-hand column are massively supported by evidence, reasoning, geometry, astronomy, naked sky observation. And so the right-hand group, which is larger, holds up on the force of their achievements and their arguments compared to the left-hand group. So that's what you would learn, one of the things you would learn. And so that supports my point that it is completely wrong to say that most ancient civilizations and classical Greek science held that the earth was flat. Factually, evidentially, historically, that is not true. Okay? Also, I want to pick out one example from the ancient cosmologies. We should go back and look at the ancient cosmologies.
Because you're, just for people who haven't heard, who know about you, John, you are a person that wears many hats. One of your hats is you're a naked eye astronomer. One of your hats is you're an astrologer. One of your hats is that you're a comparative mythologist, among many hats that you wear.
And those three things tend to merge into quite a piece of cake, those three things. So I have, as you know, Ginny, in my library, in the library of Ambergain, quite a considerable collection of books on ancient astronomy and ancient mathematics, Egyptian mathematics, ancient astronomical sciences. As a sidereal astronomer and mythologist, I know those cultures by heart. I know Egyptian cosmology like the back of my hand. I have books like this one right here that I'm going to quote. A History of Astronomy from Thales to Kepler by J.L.E. Dreyer. If you read this book, which is an absolute cornerstone of the study of ancient science, you will find that it was massively held and proven that the earth was spherical. Okay? So, but however, there's often references in the arguments of the flat earthers to Hindu cosmology. And sometimes they show the picture of an elephant, of a tortoise, and floating above the tortoise is like a disc-like earth. And they say this image, which comes from the Puranas, proves that the ancient Hindus believed that the earth was like a flat floating island on the back of the cosmic tortoise, right? It doesn't prove anything. It's simply a mythological image that was used in the Puranas. I would advise everyone who wants to do a little bit of study into this, there's one piece of work that you ought to put at the top of the list. And you can find this in YouTube under Vedic Cosmology of Richard L. Thompson. And it's a beautifully presented piece, beautifully illustrated graphically, with a very sober and clear commentary based on his book, which I also have here somewhere, his book on Hindu cosmology and the cosmology of the Vedas. It's right there. Mysteries of the Sacred Universe by Richard L. Thompson. Well, what he shows are a number of things, but two really important points. First, he shows that the Hindu cosmology was based on a model of the cosmos in which the earth is central, and it's called the Bhumandala. BHU means earth, like Bhudevi. BHU means earth, the earth mandala. So they thought that the whole cosmos was a mandala, which is a geometric organic structure, a unity, and in that mandala was the earth, hence the Bhumandala. And he shows, by meticulous argument, that the Bhumandala was based on a spherical model of the earth. He also explains in his talk, and I have the notes right here, he explains that the Hindus understood that the plane of the ecliptic was flat and not the Earth.
So the universe is flat.
Yeah, the universe is flat. That goes to our third talk of it. But what is the plane of the ecliptic? Well, the ancients observed the entire sky and they saw it as a globe, just as you do. Even though you can only see half of the globe at once, why should you assume that it's only half a globe?
But this is the thing, if you start to study the constellations that are on the ecliptic, you see that they rise in the east and they move over the night sky in an arc like a globe.
That's right. That's right. And so what flat earthers do is that they say, well, we're under a dome, so we're in a half sphere, in a globe, right? But they deny that there's a second half of the globe. Well, I put it to you that denial is problematical, because ancient peoples, not only the educated astronomers, but ordinary people, assumed that it was an entire globe. Why should you assume that it's a half globe?
I'd like to interject there that only some flat earthers say that.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah.
Good. Well, catch me on those points, because I don't want to do a straw man argument with the flat earth people.
Oh, I will.
Okay, good. So, what's his name? Richard L. Thompson points this out, and he says that he shows, and the graphics are brilliant, that the elaborate Hindu models of the Bhumandala, which are found in the Bhagavad Purana, which is an ancient and authoritative text, include not only the Earth as a sphere or pearl or globe floating in the cosmos, but they include the plane of the ecliptic. Now, you know, because we study celestics, right? The plane of the ecliptic is probably for you now a pretty elementary idea.
Totally.
Right. That is because you've studied it structurally in my maps of the ecliptic, and you've also observed it in the sky.
Yeah.
Yeah. But wouldn't you say that the plane of the ecliptic is a stumbling block for a lot of people?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it wasn't for ancient people, because you have to bear in mind that ancient people observed the cosmos and they were much more intimate with the cosmic order than we are. So what is the plane of the ecliptic? Well, for one sense, it's the plane, not of the flat Earth, but of the orbital plane of the Earth. The Earth goes around the sun and it makes a plane or plate. That's the ecliptic. And on either side of that plate, about 88 degrees of either side, all of the planets move, including the moon. So there's a narrow strip of about 16 degrees, which is the plane of the ecliptic. And compared to the entire immense globe of the sky, it's a thin plane and it's a flat plane.
Yeah.
So many of the models that the flat earthers will flash on the screen, or they will show you in a montage, one after another, and they're saying, look, it's so obvious that this is flat. Yes, it is flat. The model that they're showing you is a model of a flatness, but it's not the flatness of the Earth. It's the flatness of the ecliptic plane, right? So that's one really, really crucial, important point. Now, it so happens that one of the great foundational works of literature of the 20th century that concerns astronomy and mythology is Hamlet's Mill, which was published, I think, in the 60s. And it's the work of a man and a woman, Santayana and von Dekant. And Richard L. Thompson, in his brilliant coverage of Vedic cosmology, cites Santayana and von Dekant. And he says, at minute 18 in his talk, that they concluded that the flat earth of ancient times represented the plane of the ecliptic. They concluded that, and they confirmed that by extensive argument. So that reference really impressed me, because I have relied so much on the book Hamlet's Mill, and I have read it so much. As you can see in the library, one of the copies is completely fallen apart. I had to get a new copy. And so it's important to know that there's a continuity from the ancient Vedic scriptures to modern scholars today, such as Santayana and von Dekant, who are investigating the same same phenomenon, how human beings have come to conceive and map and model the cosmos in which they live. And it is completely wrong to say that there was a prevailing view that the Earth was flat. There is no basis for that.
For those that don't know, what is Hamlet's Mill?
Hamlet's Mill is a book on archaeoastronomy and myth that goes deeply into this question of what is the plane of the Earth, and it goes into the precession of the equinoxes and things of that sort. So just to really nail this point here, if you don't mind, I'm going to take just a minute to read a passage from the history of astronomy from Thales to Kelper, where the author is discussing Arabian astronomers of the 13th century, 1275, 1279. He gives various names. And he gives a paraphrase of their model of the cosmos, and it goes like this. In their model, the sun is a solid spherical body fitting between two spherical surfaces which touch two other surfaces, and in which the common center is the Earth. The spheres of the three outer planets and Venus are arranged on the same plan, except that the place of the body of the sun is taken by the epicycle sphere of each planet. By the way, that just refers to how they explain the motions of the planets, but the model is spherical, and the planetary bodies are all spherical, including the Earth. And finally, the quotation ends with a quotation from Abu el-Faraj, who says, quote, that these spherical bodies, including the Earth, are fixed like a pearl on a ring. So the ring is the orbital ring, and they are like pearls running on rings. Couldn't be any more clear. This is Arabian science of the 13th century, which was largely indebted to Greek science. Because after the Greek schools of science were closed by Justinian around 520, all of that science was preserved among the Arabs, who didn't really produce anything original themselves. So you see, if you look into the actual historical sources, this claim that the flat earthers make is entirely refuted. And I think it's very unfortunate that they open their argument and come out with, guns blazing using this point, which is so easily refuted. It delegitimizes their argument even before they're out of the gates. See what I mean? Mm-hmm. By the way, I'm not totally delegitimizing the flat earth question. We're going to get to the validity of it, or what might be learned from that question as these talks proceed, right? So now we come around to Columbus. Okay? Now there's a story going around about Columbus, that he was a heretic and a radical and a visionary thinker, and he defied the mindset of his time.
Yeah, and that he's Jewish.
Yeah.
And he was looking for a homeland for the Jews.
Right. Would you care to address that point?
He wasn't Jewish. We have in our possession a book that was published in 1936. One of the edition we have was first published in 1936. It was first published in October of 1931, and it's one of the most wonderful biographies I've ever read, and it's called Isabella of Spain, and it's by William
Walsh.
William Thomas Walsh. Now, if you're going to buy this book, you have to get a copy that was published before 1937, because the real truth of the matter has been edited out because of what was going on in Europe at that time. This man only uses documents, authenticated documents,
original sources
to write this. He's also one of those biographers that outs other historians for quoting other historians without actually researching anything. So obviously Columbus shows up in this biography of Isabella, and there is absolutely nothing to say that he was Jewish.
No, the profile of him indicates that he was an entrepreneur
and a narcissist.
He was out for grandiosity. He was certainly out for riches.
He was the son of a wool comber, which isn't a traditionally Jewish occupation.
Isn't.
Isn't.
Yeah, that's right.
Isn't.
Right.
And And there is nothing in this biography to show that he was looking for a land for the Jews. He was just out for himself. He was out for glory.
And riches.
And riches. The propositions that he came to Isabella and Ferdinand with, they sat there in shock, looking at each other going, what is this man talking about? Because he wanted land, he wanted titles.
That's right.
He got made into the Grand Admiral of Spain.
Right.
Without any qualifications.
That's right. He wasn't a navigator, although he could calculate certain things like longitude. He understood, and I'll get to that in a moment, but he couldn't sail a ship.
No.
Yeah.
So I think Columbus will come up in and out of these three talks, no doubt. Fascinating character. Getting
back to the point that I was making, there's a story connected with Columbus which has only been circulating actually in the it started in the 19th century and became circulated in the 20th century, that he bravely set out, and many of the people who watched him undertake his journey thought that it was crazy because they thought that he was going to sail off the edge of the world. Well, completely untrue. Neither Columbus, nor the people who supported him, nor the people of his time, both the learned people and the local or general populace, believed that people would sail off the end of the world if they continued sailing. They believed that they would go to what was called the Antipodes, or the other side of the world, and there were certain reasons for not going there. One, because it was an unknown area, it was dangerous. Two, because the stretch of water might be too great for anyone to cross, and for various other reasons. So the story that you may have heard, that Columbus bravely undertook his journey in search of the New World.
He was after gold.
He was after gold, he was after possessions, and he knew that the earth was round. And that is proven by a close examination of his diaries and of the contemporary writings of his time, who have analyzed how he undertook his journey. The story about the problem with Columbus was that he couldn't get funding for his journey.
Yeah, he hangs around the Spanish court for nearly 10 years.
Yeah, that's right.
Sulking.
He sulked, he lolled around.
Because she was so focused on unifying Spain.
Right.
And getting the Moors out. And the Inquisition was going at the time, which was only a process of trying to prosecute Jews who had converted to Christianity that were still Judaizing. Real Jews were left alone. If you claimed you were a Jew, you were left alone. The Inquisition didn't touch Jews. It only touched conversos who pretended to be Christians to get into high levels of the
government and power.
Government and power.
So they could subvert the government of Spain.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. So she used the money that she took off the pretending Christians to get the Moors out of Spain. So Columbus literally hung around the court of Spain for 10 years, sulking because they weren't paying him any attention.
And periodically he managed to drum up some interest, and they had a number of so-called councils or conferences, which happened in Salamanca, which is in the mountains of northern Spain, at the University of Salamanca, which at that time, in Columbus's lifetime, 1490 or so, was one of the greatest centers of learning in Europe. And at those conferences, Columbus made his pitch. And he there were two kinds of people at those conferences. There were learned authorities of the church, and there were commercial authorities. And Columbus needed the support of both of them to undertake his journey.
So he went to whoever he could get support from. He didn't care whether they were conversos or real Christians. He didn't care. He just wanted the glory and the gold and the titles and the land.
And the way the story is erroneously told is that they were hesitant to bankroll him because they all believed that the earth was flat and that if he sailed far enough toward the west, he would just sail off the end of the earth and all their money and their investment in his journey would be lost. Absolutely untrue. The reason why they were so hesitant, and it took a long time for him to persuade them, and he had to cheat to persuade them.
He did cheat.
He cheated. The reason why he couldn't persuade them was they said, well, we know that there is probably land out there. We've heard rumors of it, from Marco Polo and people like this. We know that the earth is spherical. All intelligent people throughout the entire Middle Ages believed or held that the earth is spherical. All the Christian church fathers who were learned, like St. Augustine and all the way down the line, held it. No, they said it's just too far. It's too far across the water.
Yeah, we're throwing our money away. If we invest in this proposition, then
you're
we're
going to die on the way.
We're going to die. We're going to lose our money. So what's the point?
Yeah, and they kept coming up to this argument. So what Columbus did, I'm going to read you exactly what he did. This is from the book called Inventing the Flat Earth by Jeffrey Burton Russell, which is a very enjoyable book. And Russell explains in detail that Columbus, although he was not a navigator, had read certain medieval and classical sources, and Burton cites the name of them, who meticulously plotted out the longitude and latitude of the Earth. And so Columbus taught himself, or learned, how to plot the longitude of the Earth. Now, longitude is like, there's a time, we know what a time zone is, you know? A time zone is 15 degrees of longitude. And if you have 24 time zones, you have 360 degrees. So sailors who are sailing east and west across the ocean must know what 1 degree of longitude is. It is so many miles or so many nautical miles. And they have to, every day and several times during the day, calculate the longitude so that they can see how much water they're covering and how close they are. So what the experts at Columbus's time had determined was that there was too much water on the basis of spherical longitude calculations for any ships to make it to the New World. So just to give you the precise details, Columbus obviously was extremely frustrated by this fact, so he decided to fudge the figures. So he had received from classical sources, going all the way back to Ptolemy, that the degrees around the globe of the Earth corresponded to so many nautical miles, and he calculated the assumed distance to the shores of the New World, and it was way too far. So the opponents who would not support his project were right. So, consequently, Columbus added certain degrees to the land. He expanded the land, making the distance of the sea shorter. All this is found in his journals. This is all meticulously recorded in the original journals of Columbus.
Yep.
And he, since Japan was, Columbus believed from Marco Polo, far to the east of China, he subtracted 30 degrees from the sea, making it 77 degrees of distance to cover instead of 107. Then, since he planned to leave from the Canary Islands rather than from Spain itself, he subtracted another 9 degrees, leaving only 68. Even this was not enough, as in a final superb gesture, he decided that an ancient authority had been 8 degrees off to begin with. He corrected that error, and he reduced the figure of the ocean to be crossed to 60 degrees, which is less than 1/3 of the modern figure. That's how he convinced them that he should go.
He bluffed.
He bluffed. And
they bought it.
And they bought it, and he went.
Because he had to go up in front of some pretty severe... the University of Salamanca was one, wasn't he?
They were the most brilliant and rigorous scientific intellects of the time. And the passage there in Walsh's book says that all intelligent people of the time assumed or held that the Earth was a sphere.
Yeah, so let's just go back to Walsh's book for a second. So, whether Columbus was Jewish or not. No one has ever unearthed any evidence that Columbus had Jewish blood. The theory has been reduced from characteristics supposed to be exclusively Jewish, as though that they were not to be found in every race. Lacking proof, posterity must accept the man's own word, confirmed by evidence that he was an Italian with Christian ancestors. As for his project, Isabella did not need to be convinced the world was round any more than other people did. It was a fact accepted by most persons of any education at all. So we're talking
1490.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he came into their life a little bit earlier than that, but yeah.
Over 500 years ago, it was firmly established.
Yeah, so I've read online that the reason that people are saying that he was Jewish is because he used to leave little weird symbols on his letters, and that's the proof for them.
which is not proof, but inference.
Yeah.
Inference is not evidence.
No.
Okay, we're at the half-hour mark, and we're going to jump ahead now in time. We're going to say, well, what about the post-Columbus era, or the post-Columbus period? When did the flat Earth argument, as it's presented today massively on the internet, start to take shape? Because it obviously didn't exist in Columbus' time, didn't exist through the Middle Ages, didn't exist in classical Greek times, except for certain advocates who did not back up their case.
So this is part of the historical lie that people of the Middle Ages, upheld by the Church, considered spherical globe heresy.
Completely wrong.
It's not correct.
That's right.
It's not correct.
The Church, when it came into power at the beginning of the Dark Ages, did suppress learning in science. That is a fact. But it did not impose a dogma of flat Earth, which some people claim when you read the history of science. That's wrong.
And that's one part of this thing about the Dark Ages being the Dark Ages that is correct. But actually, the Dark Ages, there's so much disinformation about what the Dark Ages were. And I know you have a particular point of view on what is known to be the Dark Ages was called because...
It was called because we went into the dark because we lost the sacred narrative and because the mysteries died. That's what really brought about the Dark Ages.
Yeah.
The guiding myth of humanity was lost when the mysteries died. So I'm going to hand over to Ginny the part of this story where her research is strong. And in doing so, as a transition or hinge, I'm going to read a paragraph from this book by Jeffrey Burton Russell. Chapter 3 is called Flattening the Globe. 19th and 20th century writers flattened the medieval globe. Daniel Borstein paints a pathetic picture of the brave mariners of the 15th century struggling valiantly against the darkness. In their efforts to navigate accurately, they, quote, did not find much help in Cosmos Indoploisticus' neat box of the universe. The outlines of the seacoast could not be modified or ignored by what was written by Isidore of Seville or even in St. Augustine. The schematic Christian map was little use to Europeans seeking an eastward sea passage to the Indies, end quote. In fact, Cosmos Indicopleustes was unknown in the 15th century. Isidore and Augustine had nothing to say about the outlines of the coast, and the maps that were made at that time were never intended for navigation. So you can see how confusing the whole subject was. Some of the maps that were available through the Middle Ages are called economicus maps, which means maps of the known world. They didn't pretend to be maps of the entire globe. People knew the globe was spherical, but they only knew a local area of the globe. So they boundaried that off, and they made a map, also called a mapi mundi, or economicus, which was the map of the known world. And they depicted it as flat, simply for conventional purposes, because, to all intents and purposes, the known world does appear to be flat. You can treat it as flat, and it works.
Yep.
Right? So what Burton is showing is that certain historians of a certain tribe, such as Daniel Borstein, in the 1980s were peddling this story, which was entirely untrue, that Columbus took the risk of sailing off the edge of the earth.
Borstein, what name is that?
What name is that? Borstein.
Sounds tribal.
But Borstein, who wrote, I remember this book, The Explorers. I remember when it came out in the early 80s. This book is the kind of book that is a popularization of science. And they're very, very dangerous books. Because what happens is they go into school libraries. They go into elementary school and the high school libraries. When children of that age do not have a critical intelligence, and they present a certain version of history, which is untrue, and then the students carry that forward into life.
Yeah.
But what we're going to look at now is how about the 1980, 1880, 1780, about the preceding 150 years when the flat Earth paradigm actually came to be constructed.
Yeah.
It's very recent.
Yep. Okay, so we'll start with Samuel Burley Rowbottom. So he was born in 1816 and died in 1884. Otherwise known as Parallax. So that was his pseudonym that he wrote under, Parallax. And Parallax is a really interesting character because, as far as I can tell, all of the flat earthers still quote him.
Really?
And yet Parallax actually did a... he was pinned down to a challenge in Plymouth in 1864 because of allegations that he wouldn't agree to a test, and actually proved himself wrong. But that's what the flat earthers still quote today.
So we're talking about someone who is considered to be a source figure of flat Earth theory, who was discredited in his own time, and he disproved his own hypothesis.
Yeah.
Right.
And that was the, set up a telescope on a beach, and there was a lantern set at the Eddystone Lighthouse, some 14 miles out to sea. Now, this whole thing about flat Earth theory, the current flat Earth theory that flat earthers are saying is that it's a Jesuit Masonic psyop. Well, yes, it is. But the thing that I found when I started researching all these people is that they've all got links to Masonry.
But hold on a minute. The flat earthers are claiming that the globe or spherical Earth is a psyop.
Executed by the Jesuits.
Right.
And the Freemasons.
And yet what you find is...
They're all Freemasons. And actually, when I dug, it's not relevant to do this in this talk, but when I dug further into Freemasonry, which we all know that that's a Jewish illegitimate daughter of the synagogue.
That's right, and it's for Jew wannabes.
Yeah,
right.
The whole thing it's got Freemasonry all over it. So anyway, Samuel Berkeley Rowbottom, aka Parallax, I haven't been able to find whether he was actually a Freemason or not, but his tombstone is splattered with Freemasonry symbology.
That's always kind of a stinky clue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was the first flat earther to give the size of the sun as 32 miles in diameter.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And he concocted the idea of light refraction in curved paths to save the hypothesis of flat earth theory to account for optical illusions of sunrise and sunset.
One of the problems with the theory that I'll come to in the third part is that there is a general confusion between the concept of flat and the concept of level.
Yeah.
Right. The sea is level, but it's not flat.
Well, this is one of their main arguments. Water is flat.
Right, but water is not flat.
No, of course
water is level.
Yeah.
Level at any point you are on the water.
And we'll come back to water in the third.
Yes, we will.
In the second and third, I would imagine.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so the next character we have is John Hampden. He was born in 1819, died in 1891. He was an English scientist of the Royal Academy. He vigorously promoted the flat earth idea in England. He founded the Truth Seekers Oracle and Scriptural Science Review in 1876. He was a biblical literalist and modern and based his views on Scripture.
There we go. This is another point that I would make in the overall overview of Flat Earth, that one of the really dangerous things about it is that it takes people back to biblical fundamentalism.
So I think he said, no one can believe a single doctrine or dogma of modern astronomy and accept Scripture as divine revelation.
Mm-hmm.
William Carpenter, 1830 to 1806. He was from Greenwich, England. He was a supporter of Rowbottom and published Theoretical Astronomy Examined and Exposed, Proving the Earth Not a Globe, in 8 parts from 1864 under the name Common Sense. He later published 100 Proofs the Earth is Not a Globe in 1885. Next character we have is Samuel Burley Rowbottom. Oh no, sorry, we've done him. Next character is Lady Elizabeth Blunt, 1850 to 1935. After Rowbottom's death, she founded the Universal Zedetic Society, which attracted thousands of followers, published a magazine entitled The Earth, Not a Globe Review, and remained active well into the early part of the 20th century. After the First World War, the movement underwent a slow decline, but it was revived again in 1956 as the Flat Earth Society. Her husband was a Freemason.
Right, and none of these people who were the 19th and 20th century, the forerunners of Flat Earth, were astronomers, scientists. They were not versed in the fields by which we would determine this question.
Yeah.
And often they had theological and religious reasons for pushing a flat earth model. Isn't that true?
Yeah. Yeah. And then we have the International Flat Earth Society, Charles K. Johnson, who died in 2001. He was handpicked by Shenton's widow as Shenton's successor. That was another Freemasonry handover.
There you go.
Johnson used biblical authority to assert the Earth is a flat disk. In his universe, the sun and moon are also flat disks.
That's right.
His calculations come from Rowbottom and Carpenter, and Eric Bay uses them, as do other flat earthers.
So that's the background, about 150 years. And as I said, when I quoted Borstin, at some point that belief system, which many people would consider to be, quackery, tinfoil hat kind of belief system, was folded over and carried over into conventional academic studies and shows up. So it shows up in children's school books and high school texts. So
we've got one character missing from this list, though.
Yes, we do. So we'll conclude with this one character.
Washington Irving.
Right. Now, Washington Irving is a name that you just put into a search engine. So just tell us about that.
Okay, Washington Irving, he was born in 1783, died in 1859. I typed in his name onto atlanteanconspiracies.com, so Eric DeBay's website, and his name doesn't even come up.
Presto. Bingo. Atlantean Conspiracy website is one of the main platforms of Flat Earth.
Yeah.
The name Washington Irving does not appear in search, nor have I ever heard, and I've listened to a fair amount of Flat Earth
We all
talks.
did, yeah.
I've never heard them mention Washington Irving. Well, it turns out that Washington Irving is arguably and provably the godfather of the Flat Earth movement. So let me explain how. Washington Irving was a writer of the Romantic period, and he's known for The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And he wrote in the genre of Gothic fiction and horror stories, which was very popular at that time.
So this is the Romantics is a genre that you love and know very well, isn't it?
Right, and Gothic fiction, which has now evolved into horror, like Stephen King, is a subgenre of Romantic fiction. So Washington Irving was in that school, but he also had another little quirk. Something that Washington Irving liked to do was typical of what some people call today the LARPing autist. Now, if some of you haven't heard that phrase, to LARP means live action role playing. So when you go on the internet in a game and you assume a character and you play in the scenario of that game, you're LARPing. But you can also LARP to the public. You can pretend to be someone else. And the LARPing autist, which is a wonderful expression, the autist is someone who's caught in a mythophrenic bubble of their own making, and they LARP to the world, speaking from the bubble of their reality. So Washington Irving was a kind of a LARPing autist, in that he liked to write under pseudonyms, and he liked to take fact and historical evidence and fictionalize it. And that is exactly how the story of Columbus's belief in the flat earth was created. Washington Irving, in the height of his career, went to Spain for the specific purpose of writing a book called The History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus, which came out in 1828. And he spent 3 years, I believe, in the library in Madrid, and probably at Salamanca also, in touch with the source material, delving into this material. So he had the original sources. He could have read, Columbus's notebooks, which I just quoted, showing how he fudged the distance across the sea so that he could get bankroll for his journey, right? Anyway, what Washington Irving decided to do, because he was not a genuine historian, but he was a fabulating historian. He took history and he fabulated it. Was he decided to portray Columbus as a heretic and a champion who appeared at the convent in Salamanca as a simple mariner, standing forth in the midst of an imposing array of professors, friars, and dignitaries of the church, maintaining his theory with natural eloquence, and as it were, pleading the cause of the New World. End quote. So what Irving did in this fiction was he just inverted the facts. He made it appear as if Columbus was a heretic who believed that the earth was round, and that they all argued against that, saying that the earth was flat and he would sail off the end. Completely untrue. All the church dignitaries and the astronomers and the people who were at those conferences in Salamanca believed that the earth was spherical, but the distance across the water was too much. So in Jeffrey Burton Russell's book, I'll just finally conclude with this paragraph because it makes the case so well. Russell explains in detail how Irving distorted the historical evidence even though he had access to first-hand sources. He says, letting his imagination go, Irving used his sources carelessly. He cited Oviedo's General History of the Indies, which has nothing about the council at Salamanca in it. He cited Ferdinand Columbus's biography of his father, The History of the Admiral, which gives an extended account of the meeting of the commission in 1486 and reports no objection to the roundness of the globe. So he's reading the source documents and he's ignoring what they say so that he can fabulate his own version. He cited Remensal, and Remensal made no mention at all of Salamanca. Finally, he used Bartolomé de las Casas, History of the Indies, at that time still unpublished, but in Book 1, Chapter 5, Las Casas does refer to the sphericity of the earth, end quote. So that's first-hand historical evidence that, as far as I know, is completely lacking in the flat earth community to support their case. So I rest my case that Washington Irving was the godfather of the flat earth movement today.
Do you have any idea what his motive was for doing that?
Yeah, his motive was to sell books. And that's very clear, and Burton makes that clear. It was a genre of fiction that sold well. It was a genre of semi-historical fictional writing that was very popular. So you have to bear in mind that it came out in 1828, right? You have to bear in mind that through the 19th century, someone in, say, the year 1870 in the United States of America, an average person, someone who owned a general store, an educated child, knew more about the geography of the earth than children do today in school. People were not stupid. They were interested in geography, they were interested in history, and they were also enthralled by the genre of the novel. So the quasi-historical novel had a great appeal, and Irving made big bucks on it. He succeeded very well. So a lot of it was purely financial motivation.
It's really interesting how fiction can work its way into the exopsyche, isn't it? And become truths, even though it's fiction. Yeah,
that's a great study of how the imagination can be used to enlighten and guide and inspire people, and it can equally be used to deceive them, to mislead them. So I would conclude on this comment. I don't entirely reject what I call the riddle of flat Earth. Not at all. We'll see in the remaining talks. But I do insist that those in the flat Earth community, if any of them happen to be listening to this talk, I do insist that they would denounce and renounce that primary historical lie. Because if they are really wishing genuinely for an open and free argument and both sides can state their case, then they're coming to the table front-loaded with something that is provably wrong. That's not only really bad makes them look really bad, but it cripples the argument. It stunts the argument at the opening move. So that's why I decided that we would dedicate this first talk to this particular issue. And then if we clear up this issue, then we can start to look at other aspects of the flat earth debate.
Which there are many.
It's
a huge topic. Huge topic. And I hope we cover most of it. Okay, so...
But for now, we're going to boogie on, go listen to some ELO. It's funny because this is beautiful mythophrenic synchronicity. We took a break after we prepared our briefing to do the talk. And for some reason, don't ask me why, I pulled up some ELO on YouTube.
The Electric Light Orchestra, yeah.
And Ginny mentioned that there was a recent concert in Hyde Park. So I find a concert in Hyde Park, 2014 concert. And there they are in the middle of London doing their thing. Wonderful dance music, brilliant, so goy, so white, so innocent, so playful. And they have fantastic special effects.
Visuals behind.
And behind, what's his name?
Jeff Lynne.
Yeah, behind the stage, behind Jeff Lynne, is what? The image of a huge spherical earth. Rolling behind every song. Like you.
So the song's called Around the World.
Yeah, Around the World, and there's a beautiful spherical earth behind him. Special effects. So on that note, we'll sign off for now, and be mysterious and keep it real.